So I just wanted to discuss the sentencing of Murza. So he's basically he's a Russian and a British citizen, and he was handed a 25-year sentence in a courtroom in Moscow. And the entire Western press, you can pick anything you like, BBC, Sky News, Reuters, they're all they've all made this guy front page news. And so let me just read to you from Politico a little bit about his case, and then we'll discuss. Okay, so they're saying that Moscow City Court sentenced Kara-Murza to a penal colony for spreading quote-unquote fake news about the army, so the Russian army, and quote-unquote cooperation with an undesirable organization as Russian President Vladimir Putin steps up his crackdown on dissent in Russian civil society. Right, you got to put the villain in there, right? Insert the villain into the sentence. But the bulk of Kara-Murza's sentence had to do with a third charge, treason. In the first time anyone has been convicted on that count for making public statements containing publicly available information. So basically, they're pointing to a couple of speeches that he's given. I think it was in the United States and a couple of other countries, right? Western countries, where he went and accused the Russian military of committing war crimes. I think he said they used cluster bombs in one instance on residential areas, and he said that they're bombing maternity hospitals. And the British ambassador and the American ambassador to Russia, they're completely outraged about this, right? So they've come out and they've said on the steps of the court, right outside the court, that here the British ambassador said that it's shocking. And the American ambassador said that this verdict was basically an attempt to try and silence the guy, right, and silence dissent in the country. If you look at the website of the FCO, right, so the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, they've condemned it and summoned the Russian ambassador to the UK, and they've given him a lecturing. Basically, the Russians are very upset with the speeches he's given, right? They've used that as evidence against him of slandering the Russian military and so on, and saying that this isn't what he's saying about these dropping cluster bombs and all this. It's not an official policy, and Russia is not committing war crimes and so on. Now look, well, I'll give you my 2 cents in a second, right? They're saying in Politico that he's a close associate of other Putin opponents, right? And over the years, Kara-Murza has ruffled many feathers as a main advocate of the Magnitsky Act, which long before the war called upon countries to target Russians involved in human rights violations and corruption. The defense's his attempts to remove the judge, who was also on the Magnitsky list, were dismissed. And they talk about how journalists and diplomats and so on were treated at the courtroom, which is a point I'll get to in a second. But let's address what they've accused him of and convicted him of. Now, look, the thing about war crimes, everyone is committing war crimes in Ukraine. That's the sad reality of the war. The Russians, the Ukrainians, and all the NATO countries sending their troops there in special forces in secret, Britain, they're all committing war crimes. And this is an unfortunate truth of war. And it doesn't mean, well, that's just how it is. So get on with it. No. This means you shouldn't let the war happen in the first place. And that's why it was important to actually engage in diplomacy with Russia before the whole goddamn thing exploded, before this situation escalated, which the West, as you remember, they told them, go screw yourselves. They weren't interested. Any sort of attempt to talk about or discuss NATO deployments on Russia's border, not Ukraine, on Russia's border, they didn't want to hear it. They just wouldn't hear it. So the other point about treason. Let me say something, because I actually I heard from a Russian lady today. Well, she basically called this guy a traitor as soon as the name was brought up, right? And a devil and so on, right? And I mean, obviously you're gonna have people with different opinions in Russia, so take that anecdotal thing for at face with a pinch of salt and at face value. Let's talk about Magnitsky Act, because this guy he's gone around the West and promoted this, and it's become a tool. It's basically part of the Treasury's Swiss Army knife of attacking countries with sanctions. And you can literally go on the website, and of the State Department, and look at the Global Magnitsky Act, and look at all of these, various countries, and it's not just about tackling corruption in Russia. They've used this thing against China, against you name it, right? Ethiopia, it's basically their domestic, because remember, U.S. sanctions under international law are illegal, and they are, I've interviewed the United Nations Special Rapporteur on sanctions. They're a crime, not just under international law, but the United Nations condemns them. They're invalid, they're null and void, and they only hurt people, and never the people targeted. Here, you can look, Cuban officials, you name it, everything's on here, Syria, etc. So, this guy has been a key proponent of the Magnitsky Act and everything it entails. Now, would I have given him 25 years? Of course not. I still think this is a harsh sentence, and again, there might be people who dislike him who would disagree and so on. Fine, but I think this is still cruel. I don't know what his age is. He's in his early 40s, I think. So 25 years. He's basically gonna die in prison. Practically, it's a life sentence. Let me go back to the Politico article and look what they say here. They say neither journalists nor high-ranking diplomats were allowed into the courtroom to witness the ruling, and instead followed the sentencing on a screen. Yeah, when I was covering the Assange thing, guess what? It's the same thing. The guy is literally on the other side of the wall, but we're not allowed in. They do this on purpose, right? To isolate you. So you're sitting in the dark, and I think you get 3 or 4 family members who can come in. No journalists allowed, no diplomats allowed. You have to sit in the next room watching on a screen, right? Watching on a screen, just like they mentioned. And that's also limited to 5 people. Dude, I'm telling you, they did everything they could. And again, I don't disrespect the people doing their jobs and everything, but I got the impression, and others might, will echo my sentiment, that, they didn't really want us there. Okay. I hope I'm wrong. And I know the judge at one point, refused to have any of this broadcast, and limit, and on the start of at the start of the trial, you had like 40 observers from all these groups, Reporters Without Borders, all the, the NGOs that actually cared to show up, that had their access refused, or rather denied at the last second, the day it started. And there were also, I think, MEPs, so members of the European Parliament, so on, they were also blocked from going in. Where was your reporting on this in Politico? Why don't you report about that in Politico? About all the people who were blocked and how difficult it was to cover the Assange thing, to get in. The activists had to line up at like 5 a.m. so that journalists like myself could actually get in the courtroom and cover it. That's hard work, man. That's a lot of people, who are owed a debt of gratitude, who did that, who did the work, who came out there from all over Europe, not just local activists. So why don't any of these papers talk about that? And sorry, no disrespect to Kara Murza, but that case is infinitely more important, and it's in London, right? So this is a supposed democracy, right? The UK, Russia's corrupt and shitty and all these bad things, right? But we're perfect. So shouldn't it be a much more grave that this happens in the UK? Shouldn't it be a much more offensive thing and an affront on democracy when it happens in London? Apparently not. Nobody cares. No, every single press outlet, the Washington Post, Reuters, I've read everything that's been put out today from the State Department, from the FCO, from the United Nations. They all talk about how oh, the journalists and the things had to watch from a screen next door. Where were you when this was happening to Assange? Where were you? Why did you say nothing about that? And the next point, they say here that Murza was in a glass cage. Yeah, Assange too. Did you say that as well? Again, where were you? Where were you? They put that guy in a glass cage too. And I was outraged about that too, as was everybody else who was in the room or watching next door, right? Man, this is funny. This is really funny because they give you all these details like to get you riled up and emotional and angry at how, barbaric the Russians are, keeping this man in a cage. No one's allowed to sit. This is normal. This is normal in the US and the UK. We do this professionally. We invented this stuff, man. We invented this stuff. The United States has 25% of the planet's prisoners. It's a business to have prisoners there. Many of them political too. Black Panther Party. Anybody who's attacked by the FBI during the COINTELPRO. Tons of people, man, that were basically unwanted by the state, just chucked into prison, and they're still doing it now. They're still doing it in your name. Where were you? So let's go back to what he's been charged with, this treason. Let me try and offer, again, I still think this is a harsh sentence. This guy's still a human being. I can't imagine, putting someone in 25 years, we're not, if the guy murdered people in the street, I don't think he would get 25 years. So, you can't deny that this is very, very, drastic. You can't deny that. But I just want to say something because, this guy, I mean, he's going around and basically pleading other countries to put Russian officials on a sanctions list, and he accomplished that. They're literally telling you in the articles that the judge in his case is on that list. Yeah, but you put him on that list. You wanted him on this list of sanctions. It's not the other way around, right? So who started this act of, I'm going to go and make sure that Russian judges and Russian officials have their assets seized and are put on travel ban lists in Europe, in the United States? This guy's going around. That's not journalism. That's not activism. You're going around and basically like openly trying to provoke the Russian officials. Now, again, I don't agree with the sentence. I think 25 years is way too harsh. That's unimaginable. But my point here is that even if you agree with what he does, like you think that's fine that he's saying Russian officials should be put on sanctions lists and so on. Okay, fine. Russian judges are corrupt and they need to be dealt with. Fine. Okay, let's say everything that he's doing is correct. The sanctions don't hit the judges. You guys know this, that sanctions hurt the population. How many times have I said this sentence to you? How many times have I made this point to you? Sanctions don't work. Sanctions are illegal, right? Unilateral sanctions, because that's what we're talking about here. They're definitely not from the UN, right? And even the UN, you saw what they did to Iraq. That was the US who orchestrated that. But the sanctions hurt the whole population. So when this guy is going around and saying, yes, we need to we combat corruption, which sounds lovely, right? And we need to fight, people who abuse their power. And it sounds great. We need to put these guys now. We need to put all this list of people that he's going around. He's saying exactly like this guy and that guy. Like he's naming them and saying, put them on the list. Put them on the list. Go on, sanction them. Take their stuff. They're not punishing those guys. They're punishing the whole country because sanctions. Basically, if these Russian officials are sanctioned, other countries will be punished for doing trade or engaging in any capacity with those Russian officials. So who suffers then when these Russian officials, whoever they are, whether it's Putin, whether it's, it doesn't matter. They're running this department, that department. Who suffers when those people can't do their work? The people in that country suffer. You literally seen that a million times. I don't need to explain this to you. Go look at Syria. Go look at Afghanistan. Go look at Somalia. Go look at Afghanistan. The $7 billion they stole from them. Right? Who's starving right now? Who needs that money? We occupied them for 20 years and then still steal their money. Jesus, I've never heard of such thievery. Jesus. And then the sanctions on Iraq that I mentioned a few minutes ago. 500,000 children killed. Sanctions don't work. So they're selling you a fairy tale. This guy is selling himself and other people a fairy tale. Sanctions do not work. All right? They don't work. And you are hurting your own country. So I'm not Russian. I'm not going to speak for the Russians. But if that guy, he's trying to put British officials on a sanctions list, and then, he's causing people in the UK to suffer or people in Syria to suffer. Yeah, I would feel that that's treasonous, because it's not about fighting corruption. You're punishing the whole country, the entire civilian population, just to prove a point. I don't know, man. I really don't know. I'm not saying that the stuff is, quarter century, man. That's cruel. That's cruel. That's cruel. You can't deny it's cruel. But I just wanted to make this point, because they're talking in the press, in the Western press today, about how this is such a good thing that he's done. Like they're trying to portray not his journalism, because they say he's a journalist and a politician, and I'm not talking about that or challenging that, but they're praising him precisely on this point about the Magnitsky Act, and that he's gone around and sold this and been a huge proponent. And I think that's despicable, because sanctions and the Magnitsky Act hurt civilians. They don't hurt the people that you named on the list, and you should know that. You should know better, man. I can't believe that he doesn't know this. He must know this. If I know this, and I'm telling you guys this, and you can see this for yourselves, and anyone can look this up and just see this for what it is, how does he not know this? Does that mean he deserves 25 years in prison? No, I don't think so. I'm sorry. This guy's not a serial killer. I would not give him 25 years. And I think that's cruel. But I'm not going to sit here and agree with the State Department and tell you, oh, this is his sanctions are really great and you should put people on lists and then steal it. No, that's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. Let me tell you something. The British and the American ambassadors came to this guy's court sentencing, to his sentencing this morning. Where was the Australian ambassador or the American ambassador at Assange's thing? I mean, the United States is trying to get him. So forget I said the American ambassador. Where's his own ambassador, his own Australian ambassador? That guy posted a picture of himself wearing CIA cufflinks. He was showing them off as a gift. Like, hi, look who owns me. Wow. Let me leave it at that. And one last point that I would add, because I covered the swap between the United States and Russia with Yaroshenko and Brittany Griner. So I also told you about Brittany Griner. I think that's cruel that the Russians gave her, 11 years for by mistake bringing resin or whatever it was, hash with her. Come on, man. No, that's ridiculous. So my point here is not to talk about her sentence, but to show you that maybe what the Russians are doing here is they're eyeing a swap. So they're because this guy's a British citizen, remember, right? So maybe they're thinking that they can swap him with some Russian who's locked up inside the UK. Would the British government go for that? I don't know. I can't say, but there's always this speculation that the Russians are doing this because they want to have people that they can swap and get their own back. And the one after Yaroshenko, I interviewed Yaroshenko, the guy who was swapped for Griner, right here on the channel. So go watch it. After him, they did Victor Bout. Okay, so he was the second person to be swapped. And keep in mind, all of this is happening in the last year. So while the Ukraine war is taking place, the Americans and Russians are still engaging in diplomacy, and they're helping their own people out, which is good to see. Because one thing I should say is that Brittany Griner served 1 year. I don't think she served any large part of her sentence. She was detained for a year and started serving a bit of her sentence. My point here is that the Russians actually got screwed because their guys, Yaroshenko and Bout, they already served most of their sentence. We're talking 15 years. So, the Marine and Griner, they served nothing compared to that. they're all suffering in jail. No one wants to, it's cruel, right? So it's good they're all back with their families and their home. And and perhaps this is less likely that they're going to do a swap here, or they're eyeing a swap, but it's just a thought. I just thought that I would mention this, given that the Russians and the Americans did do that recently, and I had interviewed Rashenko. You should really go and watch that interview. He gives so much insights into what it's like being in an American prison. And, that guy was kidnapped, mind you. They kidnapped him from Liberia, even though they had an extradition treaty. They just ignored the treaty. They grabbed him. DEA agents. They kidnapped him, tortured him, and then illegally, smuggled him. Basically, there's a word for that. We say rendered. Brought him to the United States and then slapped him with fake charges. I mean, they said that he was conspiring to bring cocaine to the U.S. The guy couldn't even speak English. They had allegedly recorded him saying yes to this. He couldn't even understand a word. It's very, very, they talk about bogus charges. Go look at his case. Go look at the Assange case. I've covered both of them on the channel. I'll show you some real bogus and baloney. All right, for what it's worth. So let's leave it at that.